Today's story is about the law and the incredible journey of one man breaking free from a society of unjust laws to then become the ultimate enforcer of the law in a new and dangerous land. Hi, my name is Gabe Bauer, and this is Top Shelf History, where we combine great stories with great drinks. This is the Hangman's Courier. It is the drink I have made for you today based on the incredible life of Bass Reeves, the legendary black U.S. Marshal who extended the long arm of the law to the outlaws' once land of refuge. It is a drink as hearty as the man who inspired it and is made with gin, creme de cacao, bourbon, and Mexican chocolate bitters. Now, chances are you've never heard of Bass Reeves. Most people haven't, but that is a travesty. So, allow me to introduce you. Bass was born into slavery in Arkansas in 1838. He was born into the Reeves family. Now, the patriarch, William Reeves, had passed away around 1846, and at the time, his son, George Reeves, would become the new head of the family, and as such, he would move his family from Arkansas into Texas. At the same time, Bass had become old enough for him to become a water boy, and as time went on, he would eventually grow to become a farmhand. In 1861, the Civil War broke out, and George Reeves would join the Texas Cavalry, the 11th Cavalry to be specific, and would eventually rise to the rank of colonel alongside his fellow Confederates. But George Reeves didn't leave alone. No, he decided to choose Bass to be his personal companion and valet. As the two went on the campaign trail together, they had an argument at some point, and the two were separated. Now, there are a lot of theories as to what exactly happened that would have caused this separation, including probably the most prevailing theory of Bass and George getting into it after a card game, thinking one of them cheated or what have you. But whatever did happen, I'm sure Bass was happy it did, because he hightailed it right out of the Confederate camp, out of Texas, and out of slavery. He made his way off to the Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, and would stay there until the end of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Now, in the 2 years that Bass Reeves was hiding out among the natives in the Indian Territory, he became friends with 3 specific tribes, all of which were actually major populations of the Trail of Tears, and that was the Cherokee, the Creek, and the Seminole. He became friends with them, he learned their languages, he learned how to track from them, and he became very, very accurate with a pistol and rifle. So accurate, in fact, that Bass Reeves was actually barred from competing in certain shooting competitions because he was just that good. Now, with the Emancipation Proclamation being passed in 1863, Bass Reeves decided to say goodbye to his friends in the Indian Territory, and he ended up purchasing a farm in Arkansas. In 1875, things in Arkansas would become a little bit more dicey. The federal court would be moved to Fort Collins, Arkansas, which was right on the border of the Indian Territory. Now you may ask, all right, why? What was this big change? Because this had a major impact on Bass's life. And the reason why was because in the Indian Territory, the U.S. really didn't have any jurisdiction. It was technically the natives' sovereign land, and so they had no right to arrest anyone in that territory. But then again, the natives living on the land also didn't have any right to arrest any black or white people on that territory either. So it became a haven for murderers, thieves, and any other outlaw that was just trying to evade capture. Now, the federal courts appointed a judge, Judge Isaac Parker, to be one of the authorities specifically geared at bringing these outlaws in that were hiding in the Indian Territory. Now, Parker would actually get his own moniker as a result of his zealousness in terms of bringing the law to the lawless, and so he was given the name the Hanging Judge. And the Hanging Judge needed some really good agents to bring in the outlaws in. That's where he looked to Bass Reeves. Bass was really kind of the perfect man for the job. After all, with his friendly relations with the natives and his expert knowledge of the land, there was really no one better. And so he appointed him to be one of the first U.S. black marshals in the Southwest, in the entire history of the Southwest, really. And so Bass got to work, and he was a man on a mission and so good at his job. Bass would arrest men through disguises and was so efficient at becoming the best bounty hunter and U.S. Marshal really in that region at the time. Now, of course, when it comes to arresting dangerous and violent criminals, there are always times where you're going to get yourself into some firefights, and Bass got himself into a few. He ended up having to shoot and kill 14 men over his career. But when asked about this, Bass always said, "I never took a life unless my life was actually in danger at the moment." Otherwise, he preferred to bring his men in. Now, there was also another particular issue for Bass in regard to doing his job as efficiently as possible, and that was the fact that Bass was illiterate. As a result of being a slave, he was never really taught how to read. But Bass was too much of, a legend to let reading get in the way. I mean, so instead, he would just memorize the shaping of the letters, not really knowing what exactly they said, but he would memorize how they looked, and he would memorize the drawings and pictures of the faces of the criminals on the bounties that he hunted. And over his exceptional career of 3,000 outlaws being arrested and brought in for processing, Bass Reeves never got a single man wrong. Not once. Every single person he set out to identify and capture, he got them right every time. Incredible. Just incredible. Bass truly was a man of principle and honor. He lived a hard life, but he never let himself off the hook. And even at the hardest times, he made sure to keep his principles. And there was no time more difficult, I believe, for Bass than at the time where he had to arrest his very own son. His son, Benny, ended up killing his wife in a fit of jealous rage, and as a result, fled to the Indian Territory. His fellow U.S. Marshals all felt for Bass. They had the greatest respect for this man, but they didn't really want to go and arrest his son, even though they knew somebody had to. And as they kind of waited to see what Bass wanted to do, Bass said, "I will do it. This is my son, and I will bring him to justice." And so he did. He went into the Indian Territory and he hunted down, like any of the other criminals he hunted down in his career, his very own son. And he brought him back. Bass came back from the Indian Territory a free man. Benny did not. Benny stood trial for his actions, and he would be convicted of the crime and would be sentenced to a life imprisonment. But on the bright side for our dear friend Bass, Benny was such a good prisoner over the time that he was actually released on parole for good behavior after several years of his captivity, and he went on for the rest of his life living as a model citizen. Now, if that doesn't tell you how amazing Bass's principles were and how they actually translated to his children, I don't know what does. Now, the story of the legend Bass Reeves finally came to an end in 1910 when he finally passed away from cancer, but he was revered and respected by everyone, and despite all of the challenges he had in his life, he never let any of those bring him down, and he became one of the most legendary marshals in U.S. history. Now, we have the man, we have the story, let's make the drink. And we start with bourbon. So, let's get my particular instruments ready. We have our rocks glass. We also have our mixer. And the first ingredient we are going to use is bourbon. But this isn't just any bourbon. No, this is Leadslinger's bourbon, which is made and distilled in Moore, Oklahoma, which I feel is pretty fitting for the U.S. Marshal of the Indian Territory, aka modern-day Oklahoma. Now, we will put in 2 ounces of this bourbon. Now, if you've never had this bourbon before, it is insanely smooth. It is so good. I really have to give the guys at Leadslinger's a lot of credit. This is one of the tastiest bourbons I've ever had. We will follow that up with some American gin, Aviation American Gin. Now, this is a very good gin. We'll put in 1 ounce of this. Interestingly enough, for an American gin, this was started by a Canadian guy. Bet you didn't know. Or you did. It's Ryan Reynolds, if you're wondering. There we go. Throw that on in. We will follow that up next with 1 ounce of Creme de Cacao. Now, I'm using Creme de Cacao to kind of symbolize all of the struggles that Bass had to go through throughout his life. But the sweetness of this liquor, I think, is tremendous because it shows that despite all the struggles of slavery, the struggles of living in the Southwest post, pre, and during the Civil War, it also shows the sweetness of being able to overcome all of those obstacles in his life. Finally, we will throw in a few dashes of Mexican chocolate bitters. Now, this will add a little bit more bite to our drink because, after all, a few of the people who encountered Bass ended up biting the bullet, so we should have some bite here too. It's about 4 dashes, I would say. It's good enough. It'll give a good amount of bite. And before we actually mix this, I'm going to throw in some ice to chill this down and also awaken some of the more nuanced flavors in the bourbon. And we mix. And now we strain into our rocks glass. But there you have it, the Hangman's Courier. It looks so good. Let's give it a taste. Before I do, that's a lot of liquor. So if you guys end up wanting to have more than one of these in a night, I would half this amount. Otherwise, this should be your only one because this is a good amount. Let's try. Oh my gosh, that is so smooth. The Leadslinger has so much body and flavor, and it's so good. The gin actually does a really good job of kind of evening out some of the bolder flavors from the Creme de Cacao and the bourbon, and it makes everything even that much more smooth. I know it almost seems like it's sacrilege to mix bourbon with pretty much anything that's not bitters, but trust me, the gin here is so key. The Creme de Cacao is delicious. It's sweet. It has that overarching chocolatey goodness that comes right at the end, and it kind of just sits there on your palate afterwards. It's delicious and it's wonderful. And you can think of that sharpness in the first point that reminds you of Bass's incredible abilities as a bounty hunter and a U.S. Marshal and as a lawman and a man of principles throughout his career. And that sweetness at the end really allows you to think about all of the trials that Bass was able to overcome and become such a legendary man. This drink, I think, really is fitting to the character, to the legend, to the man that was Bass Reeves. And that sounds like Last Call. Perhaps one of the biggest parts of Bass Reeves' legacy was the fact that he was the inspiration for the very popular 50s TV show and eventually the Disney movie for the Lone Ranger. Now, historically speaking, you couldn't actually be a Lone Ranger when you were going after these criminals. You actually needed a companion. So who that companion was to Bass Reeves at any time were uncertain. My speculation is that it could have been some of the natives, which therefore inspired the character Tonto, or it could have been somebody else. Well, I'm personally not entirely certain. But regardless of whether or not Bass was hunting down baddies with a companion or if he was just doing it alone, let me tell you about some of his more cunning arrests. He used one particular trick that always seemed to baffle his opponents, and that trick was that if he ever encountered a situation in which he was outnumbered or held hostage and then was facing death, he would ask the guys who were threatening his life if they could read him a letter from his wife before he died. And typically, bad guys would say, "Do you have any last words?" or some last sense of dignity before they ended up shooting you in the face. For Bass, he used this particular trick. Why? Because when he handed them the note or the letter, his hands were shaking. He was an excellent actor. He really sold his role to these guys, that he was trembling with fear. And as they took the letter and they started to bring their heads down, they looked, he would immediately draw his weapon on both of them. And they would either surrender, or if they draw their weapon back, he would get the first shot. And he brought in multiple outlaws this way. At one time in Texas, two guys cornered him and brought him along. Right as they're about to kill him, he pulls out this trick and he arrests them exactly that way. It startled one guy so badly he dropped his gun, and at that, it was over. He didn't even have to fire a shot. He brought them both back alive. He is truly amazing. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're interested in any of our other historically inspired cocktails, you can find those videos here, or you can find them also at our website at topshelfhistory.com. There we also have all of our blogs, recipes, deep dives, and more. From all of us here at Top Shelf History, remember, history is better with a drink. Cheers.